So let me introduce the writers for this evening. Noreen Nanja is the author of contemporary romance debut The Summers Between Us. As a second-generation Canadian, Noreen's writing explores themes of identity, race, and belonging, wrapped in stories of romantic and familial love. Born and initially raised in small-town BC, she then spent her formative years in Edmonton before moving to Montreal to pursue her bachelor's in psychology and English lit at McGill University and then the University of Calgary to complete her medical degree. She currently lives with her partner and her small dog in Toronto, where she enjoys working in healthcare, drinking vast amounts of strawberry matcha, me too, and exploring local bookshops. Natalie Sue is the best-selling and award-winning author of I Hope This Finds You Well. She is a Canadian author of Iranian and British descent. She spent her formative years moving around Western Canada with a brief stint in Scotland, where she discovered her passion for storytelling as a means of connection and reading as a means of comfort. When she's not writing, she enjoys binging great and terrible TV, me too, usually Netflix, attempting pottery, and procuring houseplants. She lives in Calgary with her husband, daughter, and dog. Jacqueline Firkins is a writer, Marlowe Banks Redesigned. Oh, please feel free to. She is a costume designer and lover of beautiful things. She's on the full-time faculty in the Department of Theatre and Film at UBC, where she teaches character design, world building, and period costume construction courses. When not obsessing about where to put the buttons or the commas, she can be found running by the ocean, eating excessive amounts of gluten, listening to earnest love songs, and pretending her dog understands every word she says. Jacqueline's beautiful dresses that are here in front of us, with the hashtag books as fashion, will be on display during the event tonight and afterwards until Monday, October 20th in the evening. Through the windows in the Joseph Voss Poets Corner on level 9. So anyone that didn't get to see them or want to look at them again, you can look through them almost like a really cool sort of like book, I guess you would call it dress display or a dress shop. So, you might want to take some pictures. I'm just saying, it's a little dark up there now, but, maybe tomorrow on the weekend you can come back. And that's where the rooftop garden is. And finally, your amazing host for tonight, Leanne Toshiko Simpson. Leanne is an award-winning writer, educator, and mental health advocate from Toronto. She writes joyful, messy, laugh-out-loud stories about living with mental illness and the moments of hope that help us get out of bed day after day. Leanne's mental health rom-com, Never Been Better, won the 2025 Rakuten Kobo Prize for Romance. She teaches creative writing at the University of Toronto and spends her free time designing mental health greeting cards for Pebbles & Company. The event tonight is presented in partnership with Perfect Match Bookshop, Vancouver's first romance bookstore. And for those of you that haven't visited yet, they're located at 545 East Broadway. Amy, the owner of the bookshop, is here with us today. So please support them by buying books for signing or merch today and coming up to say hi to the authors after the event. We've got some book signing tables over there. So, bookstores take a time out of their busy schedules to attend library events, so your support means a lot to us and to them. So I'm going to turn the event over to Leanne.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. I'm really excited to be back in Vancouver. I spend a lot of time here doing Japanese cultural work, but this time is extra exciting because I get to be up here with so many friends who I was like, do you want to come hang out at a cool library? And they were like, yeah, that sounds good. And I wanted to start out by acknowledging that this event in itself is a huge labor of love, and we are so grateful to Candy Tanaka for putting this all together for us, including the really wonderful display of the dresses that will be on all week. And in addition to being a librarian, Candy is also a really wonderful writer who I have the chance to work with this year. And their most recent book, Baby Drag Queen, just came out with Orca in 2023. And so it's really nice to share space created by a fellow artist. So thank you to Candy and the VPL for having us all. I was also really thrilled that that Candy read out the exact address of Perfect Match Bookshop, so I can go immediately. We're so grateful to have them with us, and we're so happy that you're in Vancouver. What an amazing community space to open. And so, yeah, we're in for a really good night tonight. So all of us on stage have a really we get to do this cool thing where we write about love for a living, and whether it's romance, whether it's self-acceptance, whether it's community care, there are all kinds of loves that matter, and we get to explore all of them through our characters and their relationships. And so whether you're out tonight and you maybe read a little bit of romance or comedy, or if you are a seasoned pro who has all of the sprayed edges of Emily Henry, we hope what you take away tonight is that there is room for love stories for everyone. And if you're ever reading and you're like, you know, I would like to write a love story for someone who feels like me, who looks like me, and you haven't found it yet, there is every opportunity to do so. I would say that all of the books that we've written, they are second chance romances for a reason, because sometimes it's hard to be yourself and be authentic and fall in love the first time. And so a lot of our books explore love for sure, but it's also about the growth it takes to be ready to write your own love story. And so if you are thinking about being a romance writer, or if you just really want to read more romance, we are here for you. We're going to do this all together. So to begin, we're going to talk a little bit about debuts. So aside from Jacqueline, who just released The Good Girls of Maple Lane, which is her 5th novel, amazing. Let's give her a hand for it feels good when you open the book and it's like also by, and the list just keeps growing.
I feel like I should use this, but can you hear me if I talk without a microphone?
Yeah,
I have a tremor, so when I hold things, they shake. So I got very used to just speaking loudly, and then I don't have to hold things. I think it feels great, but I also feel like one of the funny things about any creative pursuit is that there is no end point to anything. So it's not like you do 1, you're done, you do 10, you're done, you've hit the goal. It's constantly evolving. So there's certainly a sense of accomplishment, but I think for most of us who do any creative pursuit, whether it's baking cookies, making clothes, writing books, you're always kind of focused on what is the next thing that is filling your well and that you want to do. So it feels good, but at the same time, I feel like I flip past that page and I'm on to the next thing.
That is very true. I know immediately after finishing a book, the first question that you get is, so what are you writing next? When is the next one coming? You're like, I just spent 10 years crying about fake people and fake scenarios that I invented. But the rest of us, we are debuts, and so we're going to start there and talk about how does it feel to grow a story inside your brain for a really long time and then release it to the world for the first time. So let's start with Noreen. Noreen, The Summers Between Us is often read in conversation with Carly Fortune's Every Summer After. Have you read Every Summer After?
Yeah, I thought they were similar structure.
Yeah, they have a lot of structure, they have a lot of conversation, but Noreen has made this kind of genre all her own. And so Noreen, how did it feel to take on the very beloved structure of the dual timeline, second chance summer romance? And what did you want readers to take away from your story in particular?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm a huge fan of second chance romance. I'm sure you can tell based off of my book topic. So back when I was drafting this book in 2021, so we were like in the thick of the pandemic, I was spending a lot of time locked in my condo, and I was just really thinking about story settings and romance, and that's why I wanted to write like a summer cottage romance. Oh, it's not working?
It's not turned on.
Is it working?
There you go.
Oh,
Yeah, there you go.
So we just need to...
Right in front of my face. I'm trying to remember this. And so when I was working on The Summers Between Us, I was thinking a lot about different second chance romances that I'd read, and thinking a little bit about how I never actually seen a second chance romance that really explored a childhood of somebody who was like me, so a second generation Canadian. And so a big part of what I brought to this book, I think, is I kind of imbued it with that, right? This is a Canadian book, and I think my experience shares commonalities with a lot of other Canadians, and I wanted to have a second chance romance that other people like me could see themselves in. And not that I couldn't see myself in those books as well, like Love in Other Words, and then Every Summer After Later, and all of those beautiful books, but I wanted to also put a spin on it that was my own.
Yeah, I think representation in romance is a huge thing to consider, because when we're talking about love, it is between two people, but it's also so influenced by the worlds that we engage with outside of that relationship. And I think you do such an amazing job of putting that context into Leah and Wesley's relationship, and making us really root for them despite all of the extra loads that they are carrying as they try to figure things out. Would you mind reading a little bit of the book for those of you who haven't heard it yet? Okay. Should I go up to the podium? How do you feel about podium? Will the podium make you more or less nervous?
Right, I feel like that might be a bit intimidating, but let's see. That was a good idea. So I'm going to actually, because we talked a little bit about, thinking about growing up as like a child, as a second generation Canadian, so I'm actually going to read a bit from chapter 2, which is one of the flashback chapters. So 14 years ago, July. It was our first summer spending time out of the city. My dad had purchased a cottage in the North Bruce Peninsula that he deemed an important real estate investment, as if he couldn't justify doing something solely for the sake of enjoyment. My sister and I were reluctant to go. The cottage wasn't cool like the Muskoka ones our affluent classmates went to in the summer. But when we saw the 2-story wooden house, painted blue like the bay behind it, we knew we were somewhere magical. There was no clamor of construction or rumbling from the nearby train tracks. Instead, a bird chirped through the silence, and a cooling breeze rustled the trees. The air was crisp, free of the cloying scent of laneware dumpsters. Stepping into the cottage, I had never seen so much space, having lived my entire life in a cramped townhouse in East Toronto. Liberated from homework and never-ending extracurricular activities, Mel and I explored our new home. The house, for all its nooks and crannies, did not have a secret passageway that we could find, so we roamed the backyard in search of adventure. We traipsed down the cobblestone path that led from the back of the house to the dock. Our dock was empty, but a mere 5 meters away was our neighbors, laden with boats. Mel coaxed me over the property line, and unease trickled down my spine as I followed her, breaking the rules. I kind of want to try it, Mel said, pointing to a kayak and a giant orange pedal boat drifting on the water. The water level was low, so she had to sit on the wooden dock to reach the boat with her foot. We don't have life jackets, and that's not our boat, I said pointedly. Mel had an irreverent approach to the rules, toeing right over the edge of being harmless. Do you guys want to go in? I jumped. Standing at the landing of the dock was a boy around our age, with musk blonde hair and freckles flecking his nose. Is this really a boat? Mel arched her eyebrows. The orange monstrosity barely seemed buoyant. It was rectangular, the size of a twin mattress with pedals. The stranger approached us, his dimpled smile becoming clear as he came closer. With his soft, boyish face, he seemed harmless. He was barely taller than me, but his limbs were gangly and disproportionate, like a trapezoid meant to become a rectangle. Yes, it's a pedal boat, the boy told us, running his hands through his wild hair. Mel sprung up. Okay, let's try it. The boy considered us for a moment and then nodded. You guys can pedal together. He pointed to the 2 seats in the front. I'll hop in the back. I don't think we should get into a boat with someone we don't know, I whispered to Mel, widening my eyes to let her know that this was a bad idea. She ignored me. Hi, I'm Mel. She reached out, offering her hand for the stranger to take. Wes, the boy said, shaking her hand. Come on, let's grab some life jackets. Mel smirked. See, now we know each other. If Mom comes out and we're gone, she'll freak, I warned Mel. But really, I was the one freaking out. Were there sharks in fresh water? Or worse, what if I fell in and looked like an idiot in front of the strange boy? It would be just like school. Fine, she huffed. I'll tell Mom. You go get the life jackets. That was almost worse. I barely said a word to boys in school. My mother had warned me off of them for years. The law was no dating until after college. Not that anyone would be interested in me anyway. I turned to my sister to protest, but she had already left. Looks like you're with me, the boy said as he strode off the dock.
Thank you so much, Noreen. We were talking, Noreen and I taught a workshop on writing romance in Calgary before we came to Vancouver. And one of the things we were talking about, there's not a lot of short form romance publications that you use. So when you start writing romance, often you're just like, I have an idea, I'm gonna write an entire book out of nowhere. Noreen, what was that like? What was the most challenging part of writing romance for the first time in such a big way?
Oh my goodness, a book is long.
So true.
So one of the biggest challenges for me was, actually finishing the whole book before going back to revise, because you start to accumulate flaws as you draft, and at least I do. I don't know about you guys, but, and the further I would get in, the more flaws I would see, and I kept wanting to like go back and like rewrite, because I didn't quite, at that point, understand like the full way to bring an emotional arc across. And so that was kind of the biggest challenge for me is, you know, there's a lot of little problems that come up in relationships in real life and in books, and how to like feed them into the story to make it authentic without becoming melodramatic is definitely something I struggled with.
Yeah, that is a bit. When I read my books and I'm like, oh my god, all these people are shrugging. It's horrifying. I'm like, oh, the shrugs. I was like, I don't even shrug that much.
And the winking, and the smiling.
Did your eyes crease?
So many eyes creased.
And then romance, because you're writing intimacy, sometimes it's like the hands, people really, the forearms. Do you know how many ways there are to describe forearms? What's your favorite way to describe a forearm?
Oh, favorite. I feel like the most popular way right now is corded. Everybody has corded forearms.
Everybody likes a corded forearm.
Nat, what is your undercover body part when writing intimacy?
My undercover.
Which one do you write about where like I would like you to know that this character is hot?
Oh
What do you
yeah,
write about?
it's always forearms. Like that's what I love. So like, in fact, I didn't even know that Cliff would be her love interest at first. I thought he would just be a good friend, but then I wrote like, I take a minute to appreciate his forearm flexing, and then I was like, oh okay, that's where we're
You heard it first here. It's the forearms. Noreen, you also a lot of your book deals with the parental expectations that Leah is carrying, and I was curious, like, how did your parents feel about you writing romance? Like, what were the expectations of that?
You know what? My mom told me, write whatever you want.
Oh, we love a supportive queen.
And my dad is just not going to read it, and that's fine. Like, especially, what chapter is it that he can't read? I mean, I noted it somewhere, but he's barricaded from the book, and he's respecting it, so thank you, Dad.
That is amazing. I think also one of the challenges of writing romance that I've found is that sometimes there's this big desire. We want our main characters to be likable, but we also know that they are real people with big flaws, and you have to kind of walk this balance where Goodreads people don't want to throw you off a cliff because your character is making bad decisions all the time, but also love is messy and love is complicated, and it is very hard, and we have to give our characters some grace. And so in my novel, Never Been Better, the character Dee, who you follow through the story, is a woman with bipolar. I also have bipolar. You can ask my family and friends. Sometimes I make very bad decisions and follow through on them. And one of the challenges was writing someone that you could root for while also giving her grace to grow and change and fall in love while breaking some of the cycles that kind of constrained her in the past. And so when I had my marketing meeting, they're like, oh, like what should the comp for this book be? And I was like, it's like my best friend's wedding, but everybody has mental illness. And then they put like a version of that on the book. And I was like, should I switch careers? Should I quit academia? The answer is no, I should not. I'm very bad at selling things. But, you know, as a writer living with like bipolar disorder, anxiety, and OCD, my characters aren't always going to make reasonable choices. And so likability can be a little bit of a challenge, I think, in writing romance. And one thing that I want to do is always give them an arc that is fulfilling for them, but also fulfilling in their relationships, in which their behavior kind of rises to the people that are around them. There are some people that make you better, like the best version of yourself. And I always want that for my characters, where they learn to love themselves while falling in love with other people. And so that's why Never Been Better is, I wrote it as a rom-com, because so many times stories about mental illness are seen as tragedies. They're seen as kind of warning signs for what you don't want to do. And I think that as someone who has, you know, lived with mental illness for a really long time, things do get better if you give yourself more time to grow, and the challenge is that you have to give yourself that time, and mental illness wants to take that time away from you. And so I wanted to write a rom-com so that it would be a safe and funny and hopeful story where people living with mental health challenges got a happy ending. And that you can't always plan a perfect timeline to get your life together, but you can take steps towards making it better every day. So I'm gonna read a little bit from the beginning of Never Been Better. Also say that every time I choose to read not from the beginning, I can't find the page and I give up and I read the beginning. So this time I was like, I'm gonna read from the beginning. When my invitation for Matt and Lisa's destination wedding arrived in the mail, Tilly pinned it to the dartboard in our kitchen. Accept with pleasure or decline with regret, she snorted as she read. Why is there never a checkbox for drain the open bar with relative apathy? Especially if they're not even giving you a +1. She yanked a couple of darts from the board and took 5 steps backward, bumping into the kitchen table. Narrowing her eyes, she whipped a single dart at the wall, then turned to me, noticing my pursed lips. You okay? I surveyed the damage. My sister had punctured the palm tree crest, but the perfectly staged photo of Matt and Misa on the invitation remained intact. Burly in an ink blue suit, Matt had his arms wrapped around Misa, who was beaming in a blush satin dress. She glanced over her shoulder at him with a warmth that made me think of breakfast in bed, shared bottles of dinner wine, joint bank accounts. All the things I could barely imagine for myself. He looks like he's going to absorb her, murmured Tilly, suddenly beside me, like a matrimonial sponge. It's fine, I said, a little too loudly. I'm fine. I knew this was coming. I've prepared myself for this moment for months. Actually, excuse me, because I had to go do this thing in the bathroom. I could feel the bad thoughts coming, so I panicked and deeply bowed at Tilly before speed walking out of the kitchen and down the hall to our shared bathroom. Keep your cool, keep your cool. I slammed the door just as I heard Tilly let out the largest sigh known to humankind. Ignoring her clumping footsteps coming towards me and the waterfalls building in my eyeballs, I scrounged to the medicine cabinet for a very old bottle of Listerine. Hand shaking, I poured a full serving into the lid, then scrunched my face as I tipped the shot of antiseptic into my mouth. Tilly knocked on the door. Dee, can I come in? No, I said, swishing furiously. The mouthwash burned and my eyes teared up, but it felt good to control the discomfort. I spat into the sink, stuck my tongue out, and poured another capful. Okay, so I mostly asked if I could come in to be polite, but you know I had to take the lock off the door after the last incident, Tilly continued. So I'm gonna come in now, and I want you to promise me that you're not doing anything, suicide-y. I swished faster in defiance. No! Tilly swung the door open, bashed me with it as I stuck my arm out to hold it shut. I couldn't manage a mouthful of chemicals and a bruised elbow, so I turned and spat into the sink again. Tilly stared at the open bottle of Listerine, then back at me, and folded her arms. What? I said. Can't a girl value good dental hygiene? Tell me you're not doing some weird self-punishment thing right now. I don't know, I said, sticking my head under the tap for a quick drink of water before elaborating. I was trying to frame it like exposure therapy. Like, maybe I'll handle the wedding better if I get really good at being uncomfortable. Dee, you met these people in a psych ward, she said into the mirror, examining her nose pores. I think between the three of you, you've already got the uncomfortable thing covered. I opened my mouth to retort, but nothing came out. It had been many months since my discharge, and I still didn't know how to tell Tilly that I'd never been more at home than in the hospital with Matt and Misa. She watched my shoulders droop in the reflection of the glass, then turned and threw her arms around me. Hey, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, she mumbled into my shoulder. You'd have killer small talk for cocktail hour. Who needs it, I said, gently disentangling myself from her grasp. I'm sure everyone will be busy gossiping about the whirlwind engagement. I guess there's no established pipeline from involuntary commitment to marital commitment, especially in the span of a single year. Most of the guests only know half the story, I said. Misa didn't even tell her family where they really met. Tilly arched an eyebrow. So you're just gonna show up as a physical manifestation of their biggest secret. I gestured helplessly towards the bottle of mouthwash. Yeah, like I could even make it through the flight without having a total breakdown. I want to be there for them and, be halfway normal. But I don't know if I have it in me. If you're not well enough, they'll understand better than anyone, she said, her voice softening just a touch. It's not that, I said, pouring one last cup of Listerine for good measure. It's just that I'd rather shave off my eyebrows than watch Matt Costigan marry someone else. As the final shot of noxious mint hit the underside of my tongue, I couldn't help but notice Tilly's pained expression in the mirror, as if she too were battling both gingivitis and certain heartbreak. I haven't read that in a while. It felt like, people who narrate their own audiobooks, how do they do it? You know how long it takes? It's like you gotta go to the same place for weeks and read a book out loud while someone gives you apple juice? Crazy. Anyways, I forgot what I was supposed to do after I read. Right. Yes, so this is a book about being in a psych ward from someone who has been in a psych ward. And what I wanted to do through the genre of romantic comedy was make it more accessible, make it less scary, make it more a normal part of the way that people live. Because it is a normal part of my life my boss knows about it, my family knows about it, and I think that people who get to know me need that context in order to understand how I care for people around me. And so that is kind of the feel of my book, that mental health sometimes needs to be a little bit more visible so that everyone has the context to care for each other. The more that it's hidden, the harder it is to offer that care. And one of my favorite books in recent memory is Nat's book, because it is also a mental health, like wild protagonist, like doing her thing. And I want to talk a little bit about mental health in The Office, because yours is a workplace comedy. And Jolene is doing her thing. The opening of Nat's novel is forever imprinted in my brain, because if you have not read it yet, the protagonist Jolene gets called into her boss's office after getting caught adding white font passive-aggressive notes in her emails to colleagues. The actual dream. And so, Nat, what inspired this very unhinged coping strategy for Jolene?
I love this question because I actually have no idea what inspired it. The only thing I can think of is that when I was in college, back in the day, when you had like a paper due, and it was like, oh, submit this 10,000 or whatever, I don't even know what a paper is anymore, but you know, like whatever, like 3,000 word document. And I couldn't like fulfill it, like I'm an underwriter, and so I would just sort of like white out some extra words, but then because you were handing in a carbon copy back then, it would say like word count on the top. That's the only thing I can think of. But then since I've published this book, I actually had a former colleague contact me, and she was like, I read your book, I loved it, and all that. And then I was like, thanks so much. And she's like, the thing is, I did that to our boss. And I was paranoid because like our boss is gone, and she's like, I was saying like some really like bad stuff to her, and I'm like, that's just a really wild coincidence.
So she really thought that you like clocked that?
Yeah,
like go and
like we worked in different departments, like you know, like we never really talked. It was more like of a friendly thing, but like yeah. So that's kind of how it came up.
That is wild. Also, yeah, it was way easier to get away with stuff when you had to hand in paper copies. Like I always tell my students, like I teach at U of T, and like you know when you have to indent bibliography entries, no one taught me how to do that, so I would put 5 invisible A's in all my papers. I'm an academic now. That's very embarrassing. I couldn't ask someone how to highlight a paragraph. And so the opening scene of I Hope This Finds You Well is like one of my favorite opening scenes of all time. Nat, will you read part of it for us?
All right, so for context, she's just going into an office meeting. She thinks it's like a surprise birthday meeting, but it's not. It's gonna be so much worse than that. When I reached the dusty bird of paradise plant that Rhonda snuck into the office 5 years ago, that's both plastic and dying, a familiar dread sets in. I take a breath and open the door to the boardroom. Seated closest to the entrance is my boss, Gregory. He's got the same hair as a golden retriever and dresses in clothes that were likely issued by someone who got them during a rush grocery shop. And at least once a month, he mentions that he championed getting the complimentary dollar store tampons placed in the bathrooms. He's not just a regional manager, he's an ally. The single most notable thing about him is that he often discreetly touches his penis via his pockets, but we can all see the movements. And then openly touches the door handles, printers, and Nespresso buttons, leaving his penis dew that seep through the pocket fabric everywhere. Because he's the boss, there's no stopping his dick fingers. And that's why no workplace is ever truly equal. Next to him is Anna, our office manager. She's frowning at her phone and stabbing at the screen with a French manicured finger. She's all business and sharp angles with her black pantsuit and blunt bangs. But she doesn't normally come to these gatherings. And at the end of the table is a guy I don't recognize. A guy who is openly sketching a small doodle onto a faded yellow legal pad. Beneath his trimmed beard, I can see the beginning of a smirk. He's wearing a hoodie that says Warhammer, which would not be my weapon of choice in a war. The sleeves are pushed up, and I take the obligatory 10th of a second to appreciate his forearm flexing. As is my right. I glance back towards the open door, but Rhonda isn't trotting in behind him, balancing a cake against her bosom. There aren't even discount decorations in here, no wispy paper streamers, absently taped under the buzzing light fixture, or silvery birthday sign that is well past retirement. I take a tentative step inside the room, visibly stirring up the dust in the stiff air. My mouth dries and my brain starts to swim. Just 3 hours ago, the office dress case Larry Goodwin was all sweat-sheened and breathy in the copy room as he warned some guy in payroll that massive layoffs were on the horizon. But I shrugged it off. The doodling man lets his pen fall onto the notepad and he grins. Uncertainly at me. I always change the page and then forget the part. I don't know why they decided to invite a high school gym coach to help fire me. Unless the goal is maximum shame, maybe he'll yell at me about my 3 croissant lunches and have me attempt a push-up. Please have a seat. Gregory's voice is stern, absent of its usual shameless bubble. My heartbeat jumps into high gear as I plonk into a seat across the table from the 3 of them. Gregory broadens his shoulders in this showy way before speaking. We want to discuss a concern that was brought to our attention. He scrapes a single piece of paper across the plastic top table driven by his callous fingers. Caitlin's pink cursive email signature flashes from the bottom corner. My heart stops. Gregory continues. I'm sure you're aware of our corporate policies about interpersonal communication. I nod, realizing that my neck has actually gotten stiff. A shuffling motion to my right distracts my attention. The gym coach is writing something down on his pad. Did you include additional text in your April 17th email to Caitlin Joffrey? 3 sets of eyes bore into me as realization dawns. I try to think of a way to say, but my mind can only, I try to think of what to say, but my mind can only race through random thoughts that blur together, garbled and incomplete. So no cake is coming, is what ends up coming out of my mouth. They glance at each other in confusion. Never mind, I mutter as I look down at the paper in front of me. My heartbeat overtakes the sound of Gregory's mouth breathing. Hello, Caitlin. Per my last email, reports are due Wednesday. Regards, Jolene. We always choose the most violent form of business casual communication with each other. Gregory leans across the table to tap his finger on the page. Right there, can you please review the additional text on the bottom? I blink rapidly as the words come into focus. P.S. What is wrong with you? You're eating that puke soup to deliberately torture us, and you left a trail of destruction from the microwave to your desk. Sincerely, everyone. Admittedly, when I scribed it, I was having a particularly shit day, and Caitlin had been getting to me all morning. But she was the one with the gall to microwave an actual bowl of fish vomit and slurp it in front of us with no regard for the fact that I was nursing a hangover. Writing that note was the only form of therapy I could afford. All the joints of my fingers stiffen. All I can think of as a defense is, I don't understand how that got there. Except I do. I messed up bad.
Nat and I have done a couple events together, and every time she says dick fingers, I cheer in my brain. It's like, it's dick fingers time. So how does anyone come back from that?
Well, it was really hard for her.
It was very hard for her.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
part of it, like, I hope this finds you well. Like, you can tell from the forums, something is going down. What I also love is there's so many, like, kind of love stories in I Hope This Finds You Well in terms of found family and the way that it's kind of like thinking about the way that she describes those co-workers in the opening scene and some of the friendships that she makes along the way. Who is your favorite platonic love story to write in the office?
So this is a tough question in the sense that I have kind of 2, like I'm sort of copying out. But when I first started writing it, I thought Miley would be my favorite one, just because of the way she sort of represents Jolene's inner child and makes her uncomfortable. Like, she comes off as like being not nice to her, but really it's just she's about to enter the years of Jolene's life that really were hard for her, and so I think she's just really afraid of getting close to Miley. But who it turned out to be was probably Rhonda, only because she, like, I thought when I was writing her, she really surprised me. She was a character who I thought would be pretty one-dimensional the whole time. we all have a Rhonda if we work in an office. And she was the one that's organizing the parties, the one that, you know, like a Phyllis almost, if you've ever watched The Office. But she ends up being like, almost like giving her the mother that Jolene, like it's filling in the gaps that Jolene kind of, with her relationship, and actually allows her to repair her own relationship with her mother based on how she is.
Yeah, Rhonda is one of my favorites too, so that is really nice to hear. And how is it writing an office romance? Because you may not be able to tell from the scene, but Cliff works in HR. How is writing a romance under the umbrella of HR?
It's very convenient to have a romance because you need tension, and it's very convenient to have it that they're not allowed to be together because it's just like so easy to be like, well, we can't, but like we have feelings and we have friendship, you know, so that was a fun time. Yeah.
All romances need barriers. That's why Brother's Best Friend, also high up there, I'm like, we can't, but we must. Amazing. Okay, so speaking of other kinds of love, in The Good Girls of Maple Lane, which just came out, so congratulations. Kids novel, I have never rooted so much for two separate relationships in a single book, because there is the relationship between struggling Matt Cameron and the very hot neighbor down the street, Everett, but there is also the love story with Aggie, the rescue golden retriever that wins Cameron's heart. So if you love dogs, buy this book. But this book is cool to me because it's very sweet and wholesome, but also very spicy. How do you balance that in your writing? Like, did you feel like you were pulled in both directions sometimes?
A little bit with this one. What's sort of interesting is I started as a writer writing YA, and when I started writing YA, I knew that I wanted to deal with teen female sexuality, so that was going to be on the page and not hidden and discussed. But also I wasn't going to make anything explicit, like I'm not writing erotica for teens, but I do want to deal with the realities, especially if it's your first time having sex, what that feels like, and the insecurities you're dealing with, and what happens after in the conversations, and honest conversations about birth control and your body and all of that. So I started writing knowing that I very intentionally wanted to put some discussion about sexuality into what I wrote. Then I switched to adult, and for me, for adult, it's interesting to me because by next summer, I'm editing my 6th book right now, and that book has almost no sex in it, because it doesn't need it for that story. For my first 2 adult romances, one, the heroine's major struggle is about wanting to hide herself, wanting to be invisible. So what happens when you start having a sexual relation? Like, suddenly you have to show somebody everything. And that was a major part of her character journey, so the sex needed to be on the page for her character journey. For the second one, the sexuality was really about, she's known this young man for her whole life and has had a sexual interest in him, and he has not reciprocated that, and so the moment where they get there was going to be a major turning point in their relationship. So again, that wanted to be on the page, and I'm always very conscious of not being coy about sex. Again, I don't have an interest in writing erotica. I think there are writers who are brilliant at it, and they should be doing it. That is not my interest. My interest is character stories. So if the sex is part of the character arc, and it belongs on the page because what happens in that moment is key to the character's journey, that wants to be on the page. So for The Good Girls, the one that came out last month, we have a character who's basically kind of hidden in her schoolwork, and she's been living in her apartment building for a year and doesn't know anybody's name. And so you watch her gradually open up. So part of that opening up is the first time she is open with this man, and they have a whole conversation about it before they have sex, because to me, that conversation about what does it mean to be intimate with each other was as important as the scene where they are intimate with each other. But because it was part of that character journey, it felt like it belonged on the page. Again, as I was working through I'm in the middle of edits right now for the one that comes out next summer, and I was sort of laughing to myself going, there's no sex in this. But I thought, because it's not part of this particular journey. There is a romance and a relationship, but that the only thing that you need to know is that they have had sex at some point. But it's not sort of part of what's on the page. But it is, I do think it's interesting, and this is such a cozy, warm kind of hug of a book. All 4 of my others dig more into some harder material and harder conflicts. So there was a lot of conversation with the editor, too, about trying to land in a place that didn't feel jarring when we got to the sex. If we've sort of invited you into a book where you don't think that's going to happen, and then suddenly it does. So how do we kind of tease that out a little bit earlier so that it feels like it's an integral part of the world? But it's a give and take, and like I say, for me, it's mostly like, does it matter for the central character arc? And if it does, I'm not going to be shy or coy about it and pretend it doesn't happen. But I'm also going to make sure I write the sex scene so it's an emotional journey and not just a physical journey.
That is such good advice, because I think when you're writing anything romance adjacent, like you're often asked, like, how spicy is your book? And it can feel like a lot of pressure to be like, I don't know, the one that makes sense for the story. I've got that question. I'm like, well, you know, like, it is a lot about, like, my book is about depression, and like, it's nice to hear that there's a level of intimacy that makes sense for every book, and you don't have to kind of force it. But also, when you're writing a relationship that's so fully fleshed out, maybe some of that intimacy kind of, it has its own personality on the page, and how much is revealed comes from that too. And Noreen, I wanted to ask you about writing intimacy for you, since we're on this topic. Also, I would love to listen to you give a whole lecture. Yeah, Noreen, how was it writing intimacy on the page?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it really is about the emotional arc. So when I was editing The Summers Between Us, like, those scenes were deleted, added, changed, because it really had to be about Leah's journey. It's not just, you know, it's not erotica, but like, it is there because it is part of, you know, Leah's journey with accepting herself and learning about what she wants. And I feel like the scenes do change as you edit, because the emotional arc of books becomes more clear as you kind of get closer to the end. And so I'm pretty sure some of those scenes were actually like some of the last things that were put in. And I do think that they were a lot better when they were put in, like when I changed them to really fit with the whole story of the book. And that's how I approach like writing intimate scenes. It's really about like who the character is, like what are they trying to learn, and how can the intimacy scenes like add to that journey rather than just be on the page for the sake of being on the page.
Yeah, that's really great to hear. I think there's also a workshop hosted by the Festival of Literary Diversity this month on writing intimacy, if this is something that anyone in the audience is thinking about. We're teachers, and you can feel that in the way that we're talking at all times. But I was also hoping you could talk, like, I know in Marlowe Banks, we have a costume designer who's kind of thrust into the spotlight against her will and falls in love with someone who she never thought she'd fall in love with. And I can't help but think that Marlowe would love the dress display in the library. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the process of making the dresses and how that also feeds into your writing work.
Yeah, sure. So I was a costumer long before I was a writer, but in many ways they're very similar pursuits. They are studies of character. They are getting deep into the mind of, you know, I need to get into the mind of all different characters here. I do the same thing when I do costume work. One of the biggest differences for me is when I write, I'm starting with the words. When I design, somebody gives me the words and I respond to the words. So with the dresses, there was this idea of, okay, now I'm a writer, but I kind of want to invert that again and respond to other people's writing using my other craft. And a lot of the dress project came out of COVID. I think a lot of us were struggling with a lot of different things. For me, there was such a sense of isolation about COVID. And such a sense of, like, all of my creative work left. All of my film and theater work was just shut down in an instant. And I'm so used to being in a room with people creating story together and doing creative work together, and I was completely at sea. So I was trying to figure out, how do I use the tools I have at hand to connect with other people in a genuinely joyful, sincere way? And I thought, well, I have these skills, I can make stuff, and I love these books, and it's a way I can start to reach out to authors and say, hey, I read your book, I really loved it. I made a dress that looks like your cover. So I started making these dresses thinking, oh, you know, I'll do like a dozen as we sort of get through the heat of COVID. I'm getting close to 250 of them. And some are quite simple, some are extremely ornate. I've done ones where I sit there and hand bead for days, and then others are fairly simple as they come together. There are bits of patterns that I reuse, but it has been for me this creative pursuit that is completely divorced from my job. Even though I teach costuming for a living, that's what I do, but like my income has nothing to do with these. I am not trying to sell anything. I'm not trying to sell anything for anyone. I am not trying to fit into a market. I am not analyzing the book market going, well, what happens if I don't put sex in the next book? Am I going to lose my readers because they think I write sex books and now I don't write it? Like, all of those questions are gone. And I get to just read these books and I go like, oh my God, I love that one. And look at that pink and orange. That'd be so cool as a dress. Or Noreen's has this blue with these two figures, and that distance between the two figures is so beautifully represented on the cover. How can I put that into a dress? Or my Marlowe Banks one, which has a human figure on it. Like, I can't just put a big human figure on a dress, but how can I capture the feeling of the book and the joyful quality of the color palette in that? And then Leanne's like, I had all that fabric. People are always like, how did you find the fabric? I had the fabric custom printed.
It's a perfect match. Like,
that's how that fabric was found, yeah. But like, I love the sharks, and that's like, there's such a sense of whimsy and wit to that cover and the color combination, but yet it has a depth to it, and it sort of always makes me want to know a little bit more about what's going on inside that cover. What is this world? What is that woman diving? What are the sharks? What is happening here? So with each dress, I get to kind of explore, what do I see in the cover that's interesting, but also what do I find interesting about the book itself? What feels like it's something that's sort of sweet, and what feels like it's something really grand. What wants to be shiny and crisp, and what wants to be soft and gentle. So it's a really fun way for me, again, to be completely divorced from trying to sell anything, create anything anyone's going to buy, and just use the skill set I have. And it's been a beautiful way to build community, to like genuinely reach out to people on social media and say like, I loved your work, I did a thing, and I hope it just makes you smile today. And that's literally the end point.
That's also how I feel about all your books. Like, I would say that all of your books are like, there's so much emotional depth to them. You're rooting for their characters, and they are ultimately such feel-good books. Like, when I think of your work, it makes me feel cozy, it makes me feel held and supported. And I know that your most recent book is often described as cozy, so I was hoping you could kind of light up our room a little bit and read from The Good Girls of Maple Lane.
And I am going to use the podium because I need to set the book down.
I'm glad that you're using the podium.
So I think all you really need to know is that there's this apartment building. This is set in the US just because it was for a US publisher. If I get a Canadian publisher, anyone out there, I will set everything in Canada. But so she's in Ithaca. There's a mention of Syracuse, which is about an hour away. And so this young veterinary student who's going to Cornell has been living in her building for a year, has not learned anyone's name except for the little dog that lives down the hall, whose name is Pilot. Everyone else she's given a name to. So there's Plant Guy, like everybody just has a generic name because nobody in this building has gotten to know each other, which frankly, having lived in a high-rise in Vancouver, I feel like is kind of a Vancouver thing too. Like, you can live in a high-rise and never get to know your neighbors. So she's received a call about a rescue dog, and she filled out the application when she was blind drunk the year before, mourning her old dog. So she filled out this foster application. A year later, they pull up her application, and she's talking on the phone with the guy who's calling her. I'll be blunt, Miss Good. You're not our first call. We've worked through our list of regular foster homes, reached out to applicants who seemed more secure. The pause that follows is loaded, and I appreciate Andy's attempt to soften the truth, namely that I'm his last resort. But it's not like I don't understand. If I was in his shoes, I'd be my last resort too. This dog needs a lot of one-on-one care. We don't have the funding or staff to provide that here, not with so many other dogs also needing our attention. We've called some other shelters, but they share our limitations. If we can't find a foster home within 24 hours, I'll be there, I say. And I know this is madness. I'm never home. I don't have a car, or help, or time, or space, or savings, or upper body strength. I shouldn't even pet parent a healthy little handbag passenger like Pilot. How am I supposed to care for a 125-pound golden retriever who needs intensive rehabilitative care? But how can I let her die? You sure, Andy says? She might not. It doesn't matter, I interject before he can finish that sentence, in a way that will yank the awaiting sobs from my chest, the ones I'm barely keeping down. I just need to sort out a ride, but I can come by this afternoon if that works for you. He doesn't answer right away, probably rethinking this whole thing since I just admitted I don't have a car. Obviously, this is an added challenge, but not an impossible one. We're open until 5 today, he says. I'd love for you to meet her. Same, I say, and my eyes drift toward the photo of Marmee on my fridge, smiling like she's looking on in spirit and letting me know I'm doing the right thing. I grab a few more details from Andy so I can arrive prepared. As soon as we hang up, I look up the cost of an Uber. It's almost $100 each way. Not ideal, especially since I'll have to call in sick to Loden & Linden, the upscale furnishing store, where I spend 12 tedious but well-paid hours every weekend, selling overpriced candles and textiles to bored housewives and affluent influencers who need tastefully curated props for their highly filtered lifestyle accounts. A cab is even more expensive. I could take the bus, but I'd have no way of getting a dog home with me. This shouldn't be that hard, but my only close friend is on the other side of the Atlantic, and my nearest living family member is on the West Coast. A thought occurs to me, a long shot for sure, but not an impossible one. With a quick detour through my bathroom to pee, retwist my tangled top knot into a slightly less deranged version, and swish some toothpaste, I scurry out my door into the other end of the communal hallway, pausing before apartment 606. I know very few things about the current tenant. He likes plants, he likes corduroy and Converse, he has a kind smile. He often boards the elevator, not from the main entry, but from the lower level parking garage. It's not a lot to go on, but I don't have many options right now. I take a deep breath and knock. A few seconds later, plant guy opens the door, blinking at me through old-fashioned wire-rimmed glasses. His loose brown curls are in gentle disarray, the lower half of his face is faintly stubbled, and his pumpkin-colored sweater is rumpled, tugging sideways over a white crewneck tee and moss-colored cords. A familiar jolt of anxiety sets in, a sharp discomfort with strangers I can't shake off, even during an urgent animal rescue. My fingers flex and curl with a need to fidget, but I decide no one who wears a pumpkin-colored sweater can be all bad, even if he steals houseplants. I thrust out my hand. Hi, I say, I'm Cameron Good. I live in 602, grad student, veterinary medicine. Sorry if I've been, whatever, doesn't matter. I think you might have a car, and I just got a call about a dog who will be euthanized if I don't go get her right away, and she's in Syracuse, and she can't walk, and I can't lift her on my own, and I really love dogs, and I think this one needs me, so any chance you're free and interested in saving a life with me? He continues blinking at me, completely nonplussed, and my stomach sinks. He's going to say no. Why wouldn't he say no? Wouldn't I say no if he came to my door and blurted out a plea to drop everything and go on what might be a completely invented rescue mission? I could be a dealer or a serial killer. Even if he threw aside all logic and decided to trust me, surely he has a job or classes to study for, or a weekend hobby, or a social life, or a botany documentary series to binge. What possible reason could he have for helping me? But then his kind smile appears, slowly building as he takes my hand and shakes it. Hi, Cameron, he says. I'm Everett Redmond. Give me a moment to grab my keys.
And of course, they go.
They get the dog.
They get the dog. Here at Lovably, we are a big fan of second chances. Whether you are a dog, whether you are living with mental illness, whether you are secretly in love with your childhood crush, whether you ruin all of your office relationships and have to rebuild them from the ground up. Why are we so drawn to second chances? We're going to open the chat now.
Why are we so drawn to second chances? I think I love a good redemption arc when it's someone that you like deserves it in a way. Like, I don't want to say I love redemption stories because, like, but yeah, that's what draws me to it. Is just seeing someone sort of in their same world, but everything about it changes, and the arc is more changing of how you see them versus like,
Yeah, that's a really beautiful way of putting it. Thinking about mental health, like when you're in a psych ward, you're removed from your everyday environment, and you're asked to kind of consider who you are outside of the stressors or the places that shape you. And you have to learn when you go back, you're like, how do I keep this new shape that I am trying to explore? And I think it's that idea that like, it is really hard to control and change the things around you, but you yourself can see things in a new light and find new language to describe the same things that maybe you've been seeing for a long time. Noreen, do you want to talk a little bit about second chances?
Yeah, I mean, I think I really like second chances because I think regardless of like the format on which you're being told, is books that deal with second chances have to have a lot of emotional growth. And as somebody who really likes to, think about characters, whether I'm writing them or reading them, I find it really fulfilling to understand, like, why might somebody be able to be redeemed, or why might you fall in love with the same person twice? So I think it's a beautiful trope.
Yeah, it's funny, right? Because my first books were YA, and the great fun of writing YA is you get to write firsts. It's your first love, it's your first everything, and not necessarily for anyone, but that was one of the things that drew me to writing YA, was getting to write those big, terrifying, but also exhilarating firsts. And then when I shifted into writing to adult, for me, one of the great joys is you are writing characters who have history. We have, we can call it baggage, we can call it scars, we can call it any metaphor we want to put out there. But ultimately, what we bring to a relationship, a workplace situation, a family situation, like what you have with the family in yours, you've got that that amazing dynamic with those three characters in your book. You are coming with history, and how does that impact what we do? And that's fascinating to me. And that's, whether it's, like in this one, of course, the dog has been just terribly treated, but also the young woman who's the heroine of the story, she's going through her own growth arc. So they sort of parallel each other and braid together with how they come together to help each other out of their shells. But you don't have to create that shell. You get to start at that point and then say, what happens in the middle of the story that we're in? Which is just a great challenge, I think, as a writer, because we're all in the middle of our stories. So how do you then start to weed through what do we really need to know from this moment on in order to tell the story from this point to here, instead of reeling it all the way back to the very beginning? And it's just, I just find it a fascinating challenge. I love reading these stories. I love all three of these books up here, because there's so much rich history to all of these characters, whether we see it completely on page, like in Noreen's where we've got the dual timeline, whether we get it through sort of little snippets that get told, whether we get it through the conversations the three characters have with each other, where you start to get a sense of flashback. Like, they're all told in different ways, but figuring out how that history impacts the choices we make now, I just think that's so much of what we all do every day. So that reflection of real life, I think, is just really engaging to write about.
I often, like, being a writing professor, a lot of the times my students are like, well, we have to start at the very beginning of everything this character has ever thought of what they had for breakfast. I'm like, you actually do not want to start there. You know that. Every writer knows so much more about what is on the page. Like, there is a whole scene from Never Been Better at a punk concert that is on the cutting room floor and will never see the light of day. Has no relevance to the actual story that ended up being, but it was important for me to write it to understand those characters. And when we're entering new relationships, there's often so many hang-ups from who we think we should love, who we think could ever love us, that we bring into those new relationships. So Noreen and Nat, actually in both of your books, there is a very strong sense of who the character thinks some characters think they should be dating versus who they're falling from. And a little bit, I wouldn't say it's not like fake dating, but I feel like it's like a little hint of fake dating. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so there's, I wouldn't say like a love triangle, but there's like an exploration of another path in the summers between us. And one of the reasons why I wanted to include that was, part of Leah's arc is that she has to learn to accept that, maybe what she wants is different than what she was expected to want, and that's okay. And so I wanted to put a person who is perfect on paper on the page, like a really viable choice, and help her make that clear choice that even if there's something perfect available, actually perfection isn't what she wants.
Yeah, and what's perfect on paper isn't always what's perfect for you as a person.
Not that people are perfect.
Yeah, it's actually a very similar answer in that I wanted to show Jolene having a chance of something that would be sort of the easy route. Like her family would want this, and it presents us together. So she has like a fake engagement, and I have a family dinner scene where it's sort of presenting everything she's ever wanted, but not with the right person. But it's still, I love to give her an easy route. Like it's sort of what she does with the emails. It's sort of the easy route. It's sort of like, it'll be acceptable, but it won't be the life that she truly wants. It's sort of like ordering a chicken salad. Like it's good, you'll eat it for lunch, but then it's not the cake. And so I want, but then you've got to fight harder for the cake. So maybe I'm just hungry.
For context, Matt and I went for high tea this afternoon and ate like 12 cakes, so this is a very topical reference.
I'm still thinking about a few of them.
Another thing that we have in common is that we're teachers. And do your students know that you write romance novels? Have they read them? How does your work teaching people kind of inform the way you write?
Yeah, and I want you to answer the question too. Some of my students do, some don't. They kind of discover it on their own, and then if they talk to each other, they might figure it out. I was laughing. I did a theater project in Chicago, and I never know when I'm doing a theater project who knows that I'm a writer. And all of a sudden, from the back of the house, we were paused because there was dress rehearsal, and somebody goes, "Jacqueline, do you write romance novels?" I was like, well, I guess everybody knows now. So I never know who knows. But ultimately, so much of what I teach outside of the sewing classes is about story. It's about how you build a world. It's about what kinds of stories do we even want to tell these days. It's about character. There's so much that's about character and costume design. So even though, certainly in academia, they're like, this isn't what we hired you for. But I also feel like it's exactly what I teach. And for my students to know that I can come to story from different vantage points, I find extremely helpful, because so much of what teaching is about changing tactic. When you think you figured out the way to deliver information or inspire a conversation and it's not working, and then you have to find a new way into it. So for me, knowing that I have these two careers, one of which is I am given the story, now I have to figure out who the characters are, what is the world, how do we put that on stage visually. Then there's the other way, where I'm figuring out what the story is from the get-go and what I want on the page. So just being able to shift brains in that, I feel is really helpful just for how you teach anything. And then again, because of those overlaps of character, world, story, how you arc something from start to finish, how you figure out what a crisis is and why that's important in story, and conflict, like all of that is stuff we delve into in my design classes. It's just that the answers in design classes are visual, the answers in writing are verbal. But ultimately, those things link up all the time.
Yeah, I love that. I think, because I teach creative writing in Canadian literature at U of T, and so most of my students know that I'm a writer. Sometimes they think I am a different Leanne Simpson, who's also a really wonderful Indigenous writer, and then they read my book, they're like, oh, this is not the same book that I was thinking of. But one thing that's really nice is that when I was a creative writing student myself, I always felt like there were certain stories I had to write to be taken seriously, and I think being in academia, sometimes you feel like you have to present a certain way to be listened to. And one thing that I've learned living with bipolar disorder is that being listened to is important because you aren't always, if you're living with mental illness, so being able to reclaim that agency and kind of tell stories about people living with mental illness in ways that are, warm and welcoming and I think supportive has been really helpful. And then I do see my students taking on some of those same questions in their own work, which is really nice. They're more willing to be open about the things that they write about. We're able to have conversations that I think if I just wrote my scholarly work, like they're probably not going to talk to me in the same way. So it's nice being able to connect with people in multiple ways. And also the new role that I've taken on at the university is throwing book events for the campus. So being someone who's always loved reading And it's nice to be able to invite other authors to share their work, and it creates more of an ecosystem. The students don't feel so far away from being a writer, because I was also a student. I published in student journals. I worked my way up. I remember being paid for the first time writing a short story. It was such an amazing feeling. I couldn't believe that someone would pay me for something I just loved to do. And so for my students, I hope that they also don't feel far away from that, because they aren't, you know? So yeah, I love teaching for that. I was gonna say, I'm just checking time. How are we doing, Candy?
We're at 7:20. So if you have your, maybe like, let's see, you moved it 8 around 3-ish. So maybe like 7:30 and then ask for questions.
Yeah, okay, sounds good. I think we wanted to talk a little bit, we're gonna talk a little bit about challenges of publication, but also covers. Sometimes those things go together. So let's take a poll. Is this the first original cover of your books? And I think we'll do Marlowe Banks for yours.
Yeah, so Marlowe Banks changed dramatically, and without going into all the weeds of that, it was purchased as women's fiction, and it had a women's fiction cover, which was not going to be a cartoon cover. It was actually photographic with a bunch of sewing supplies on it, because the redesign is a reference to the fact that she's a costumer. And then they shifted to marketing it as romance, so then it shifted into the cartoon cover. And that one they just said, like, this is the cover. So there was not a lot of conversation. I did ask them to put the tape measure around her neck. I was like, she just looks like she's a girl shopping. I was like, can she at least have a tape measure? So they did make that adaptation. But that one changed dramatically from what I thought it was going to be, because the publisher shifted marketing lanes with it.
Yeah, the romance women's fiction situation is very interesting. So mine was romance and then shifted to women's fiction, so it went the opposite way. This cover is just what it was. I'm like, yeah, she's diving into a pit of sharks. That feels like mental illness. That feels good to me. But the U.S. cover, which I don't have, if you see me after, I have bookmarks with the U.S. cover. It's also sharks, gotta be consistent. But she's like walking into the ocean, and I was like, I think she looks too sad. Like, this is also a really chaotic destination wedding. So I had them put this like tiny pineapple drink in her hand as she's like wading into the sharks. So I was like, that's the vibe. And I've always loved that. And then like a year after the book came out, it was like New Year's, and someone tagged me from Chicago in Instagram, and she had knitted this quilt of all of her favorite covers of books she'd read that year. And for mine, she knitted the little pineapple drink, and it was so vindicating. I was like changing careers immediately. Noreen, how about yours?
I think my cover changed a lot as well. I think there was always like a piece of it, like it was going to be a cottage kind of cover, but it was also kind of in between women's fiction and romance. And so eventually, we talked about how I really wanted to have representation of the characters on the cover, and I really liked the idea of having longing portrayed on the cover, and so that's how we ended up with this beautiful cover. But yeah, definitely a couple iterations.
And for me, we're working with this artist that did sort of airbrushed cubicle, like industrial stuff, and he was doing some cubicles. And like he had all the characters, and I was giving him so many opinions. I was like, you need to include the fern. He even had like the 3 push pins that are on her desk, and like so detailed and so beautiful. And we were just like maybe like 10% away from the final. And then the UK team was like, this is the cover. And then it kind of dropped in my inbox, and I was like, I love it. Like I love it. And then the US was like, we actually much prefer the UK one, so we're just going to do that. And so I agreed to it, and then here we are.
Yeah,
Publishing's funny.
Publishing is funny. I mean, like for my US, because I have different ones in Canada, US, which is I think kind of unusual. But they like looked at this one, and they're like, we're gonna do this, but blue and watercolor, but it also will just have sharks. And it's interesting to think about. They're like, oh well, the market will react differently in the U.S. if they had more of like a consistent look to their books, I think, from that U.S. imprint. So it's interesting to see how that shapes up. But it can be a really long process. And what do you think was like your biggest challenge to publishing? I know you have multiple books. So what do you think was your biggest publication challenge so far?
When do you want to take that first?
And what advice would you give to people trying to break into writing?
My biggest challenge was getting public, querying. I remember was traumatic. It was just rejection, right? It's hard because you're really offering someone a piece you've put so much work into, and at the time I felt like I was being rejected, like they were rejecting me, even though I didn't know that they might have a book similar to them, any other thing that is sort of not actually negative about me. I was taking it and making it negative because that's what I do in life. And so for me it was and also I started out trying to get published writing YA suspenses, and so but the problem was I was putting jokes into the murder scene, and then they were I think it was a tone thing. So then when I started writing I Hope This Finds You Well, it was really after being rejected so much that I decided to not care about, I wrote it during a time when everyone was pretty much not working in the office, and I didn't think anyone would ever want to read an office book. Co-worker books are kind of hard in general, and then to have it during that time, I was the world's never going to go back to that. And so it was really I'm just going to write what I want, and they call it a fuck it book, when it gets published and you weren't caring. And then that was the book that was the easiest time. It was unbelievable, compared to hundreds of rejections.
Yeah, this was your fourth full,
you had it,
yeah, which I think is amazing, and also really important to know. I also have a whole book that will never see the light of day. I think Noreen, you have one.
I have more than I can count.
So even you can love a story, you put it on the page, and it's always worth it to put it on the page, no matter where it goes, even if it ends up in the secret hidden drawer. It's always worth it to put it on the page because you grow so much for the next story that you tell. You never know which one is going to be the one that kind of sparks for people.
I mean, I think I relate to Natalie's challenge. The rejections are really hard, and if you don't have context for them, they can feel really personal. But they're not, and I know that now. And the other thing too is for the summers between us, it kind of straddled two genres, women's fiction or commercial fiction. I don't know how I feel about the title women's fiction, and romance. And part of it was, finding a right home for it because, it kind of was in between two spaces, and not all places wanted to publish a book like that. So that was a challenge as well.
Yeah, I would say the same. Never Been Better won a romance award. And it is a romance in many ways, but it also is so much about self-love. I think it is a mental health novel, within a rom-com bracket. And so I did feel a lot of, sometimes I felt a bit like an imposter, even making friends with romance writers. I'm I'm a romance writer. Question mark. It's a question mark on the end that was invisible, but I knew in my heart. But I feel there's love stories aren't just about romantic love, they're also about the love that we surround ourselves with in many other ways, and so it's an honor to write in a genre that makes so much space for so many people, so I try to remove that question mark a little bit more these days.
Well, anyone who's been through querying just knows it's a rotten time, so I will echo what everyone has said up here, but I think for me, potentially, the biggest challenge being in any part of publishing is, as an author, is finding out how little is in your control. You write this book and then you go through editing and things might change. They might change how they're going to market. So you think you've written a character study and they're going to market it as romance, or you think you've written a romance and they're going to market it, you think you've written a rom-com and now they're going to market it as something else. You have very little control over how it's marketed. You have they usually call it a consult on your cover, but how much they take your consultation into consideration, there's a huge range of it. So very little is in your control. I have read some phenomenal books that didn't sell well, and now the rest of that author's career is trailed by that sales track record. I've read some books that I go, really, this one? And it's a bestseller. There's a huge range, right? And so much of that can just be it hit the right TikTok account at the right time, and that took off, and this took off. or it hit a moment of what's going on in culture at the perfect time. Some of them are also just, of course, fantastic books, but so little is in your control. And learning how to inhabit that space of I am going to pursue this thing that I cannot control is a really hard thing to do. You could write the most amazing book and nothing happens with it, and that is not your fault, and you have to find a way to be okay with that. So I'm just going to quickly take on my advice part of that is find your people. The world of difference it has made to connect with other authors and go, am I insane for being stressed about this? Can I ask about that cover thing? Or do I need to just keep my mouth shut? Or do you have any suggestions about what the heck I do on social media, which still terrifies me? Like, you just find the people who can help you find context for what it means to live in a space you cannot control what happens to something you pour your heart into.
Yeah, and the other thing you can't control is people read your book, and sometimes it's stressful, but I mean, some of the best parts of publishing this book haven't been, like, I love doing events like this, it's always nice to meet people, but when you get, like, a DM from someone who lives on, like, the other side of the world, who saw something in your writing that they needed to see, like, in that moment, I think that's, like, those, you never know when those are coming, and they mean so much, and I can't remember who told me to do this, but I think it's Kaya Brown, but she keeps a folder of all of these kind of like out of nowhere positive things that have happened, because the bad stuff can feel overwhelming. It can feel really discouraging even after you achieve your lifelong dream and publish a book. Some of the stuff is stressful still, so keeping kind of like touchstones of good things that are happening around you, no matter what stage of writing that you are. Like I have like the student journal that I was published in. I have like a psych ward survivor who sent me a message, or like a Japanese teenager who was like, can you send me bookmarks for this book, because I've never seen anything like it, and those kind of things. And the sales track, read the Walrus article that just came out if you're interested on sales track. It's excellently written, but you can't judge yourself by those numbers because they're not yours. The story is yours. And I think with that, we're almost at 7:30, so I wanted to open up 7:29. My time management skills as a teacher are so bad because I'm going so many tangents. I'm very impressed with myself right now. Okay, we're gonna open it up to questions. Are you a romance reader? Are you a writer looking to break in? We are all ears. We need a microphone for questions as well. Oh yes, hello. That's taped to the floor. I didn't win it.
What is your name again?
Leanne.
Leanne. My name is Kigango. I'm also an author, and I live a bipolar disorder. I wrote a book called Surviving Samsara, a memoir of breakdowns, breakthroughs, and mental illness. And my follow-up book that I've been working on for 30 years is called Pinata de Amor. To make a long story short, it's a true story that happened to me when I was living in Mexico. And it's about somebody falling in love, well, the protagonist, me, falling in love with my Spanish teacher, who is the girlfriend of the town's most notorious playboy. And this is a town where, there are these womanizers and the bohemian artists. And at one time this book it hasn't been published yet, but it was well received by audiences, but times have changed. We have toxic masculinity and cancel culture, Me Too. The climate has changed. And I don't know how to save this book, if it's even salvageable. And I put so much of myself into it, partially because it's autobiographical and the character is incredibly flawed. But what kind of advice would you say to turn something that you poured so much of yourself into and find something redeeming that's still salvageable? Anybody who is willing to chime in into this?
Thank you. Congratulations on writing. Like you've written 2 books. That's amazing. That's really, really cool. One thing I felt when I was writing Never Been Better, and I was working for Bell Let's Talk at the time, so it was actually kind of a funny time because I would be like editing like communications about mental health, but then also editing myself to be able to be employed and deliver communications. It's kind of like an interesting thing. And I was always worried, I was like, maybe like mental health its moment will pass and no one will want to read this book, or it will be the wrong time. I'm not moving fast enough, but because I was ill, there was not really a faster timeline that I could write the book. And I would say that the most important thing is that the story that you tell will matter no matter when you tell it. It has to be the right time for you. I will also say that there are previous iterations of characters and like scenes in Neverwinter that were from works that didn't end up being complete in the way that I thought they would, but a lot of things transfer. Characters' voices stay with you even if those characters don't make it to the page. Settings are very transferable, and so even if it ends up being a different book later on with more time and more distance, that doesn't mean that that work goes anywhere. And if you want to, the nice thing, I was just in Calgary and they were talking about some of the new the indie publishing things that people are doing. At Putnam, my publisher in the US, I think they've picked up like 5 indie published authors who became trad published authors afterwards. I think there used to be a big division between indie publishing and trad publishing, and it's not that way anymore, which is really, really nice and important because there are so many amazing books that have, as we have talked about today, like there's a lot of gatekeeping in publishing, and so sometimes there's nothing it's not about the quality of the work, it's not about you, it's just there are all these kind of blocks and systems throughout, and so if that's something that you're experiencing, there are so many other pathways to publishing that are just as important and will help you find readers. And so I would say, if you're being told no by other people, you can say yes to yourself too. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add.
Yeah, I agree. And like, every single one of us here is lucky. It's almost like writing a book is like you're writing a whole book, but you're also technically buying a lottery ticket in the publishing lottery if you want. And so every book is just one ticket, and it's unfortunate that there's just that it is that way. But yeah, keep going, and
The more you write,
the right timing it will.
Yeah, the more you write, the more opportunities you have to be kind of in this space. And so that's why I always tell my students are always, they don't feel like they can introduce themselves as a writer because they're like, oh, I've only published in this magazine, or oh, I've never shown any of my writing. But if you're doing the craft of writing, like you are a writer, and you're building, when you're telling people that, you're building more pathways for your stories to find people. So I'm really hopeful for you that that you're able to help your story find its audience.
I'll also add, the market keeps changing.
That's true.
It keeps changing. There are trends, and not to reduce this very personal story you told us into anecdotal terms, but like, people thought vampires would never come back, and now we are flooded with vampire books. There's evolutions. Like, all fantasy used to be fringe, and now everything's fantasy. Like, things will evolve. So even if it feels like, oh no, my book is 2 years ago now, in 2 more years it might be the perfect thing, or it might be the perfect thing with this little tweak to it, or a slightly different setting, or like, it's constantly evolving. I am so excited by how many authors have posted something on social media in the last couple years that say something to the effect of, this was dead 10 years ago, and now it's its time. There's been a lot of that happening now as things have been changing in the market. So just like, don't shut down the optimism, even if it feels like the world is linear, everything's cyclical. So things come back, and just hold on to that.
That is great advice. I wanted to write a hockey romance, and like, it's too Canadian. So I was like, I shouldn't have thrown that book in the garbage. Anyway, that's my regret story. Anyone else have a question? Yes, hello.
Hi. I'm a teacher, so I'll use my teacher voice.
Love it.
I sort of have 2 questions. One is process-wise, like, I'm discovering myself as a writer. It's kind of always been part of me, but I thought, like, I haven't done like all the things you say you do. But I'm a stream of consciousness writer, so I actually loved all the reading aloud because I heard all that stream of consciousness thought in it. So I wonder how that process works. And then, like, my life is so full, and I'm like, how do you find time to write? I'm a teacher librarian, so I have a full-time job there. Plus, I'm on every committee that there possibly ever was, doing all the activist work that I'm wanting to do. And I'm like, when do I ever time? So I came here today, so I'm like, I need time for me. I need to show up for myself, so.
So happy you're here. Yeah, I mean, it is really hard to keep everything balanced, especially when you're passionate about a lot of other things. And one of the things, like just having met you now, one of the great things that if you're active in other communities, a lot of that expertise lends itself really well to writing. So before publishing a book, like you have to write the whole book, and I definitely didn't have, it wasn't the right time for me to do that when I started out, but I would write I would write newspaper articles or magazine articles about the other areas that I worked in, which was mental health, which was teaching, and so using some of the work that you're already doing in the community and becoming an expert in those areas and writing about those is a great way to build yourself kind of a resume for when you are ready and you have the capacity to pitch the big project that's in your heart. Then I will also say that I used to be a very, I like to write, it has to be the right temperature in the room, I need my perfect snacks, it needs to be at a reasonable hour. I have a toddler. There's no reasonable hours to write. And so I had to learn to use the Pomodoro method where you just set yourself a timer, even if it's only for 20 minutes, and you write those 20 minutes and you stop and you give yourself a little check, and you do that as, it's not about finishing a book, getting big chunks of that rarely happens for me. It's about giving myself enough kicks at the can to make progress, even if they're imperfect, they're messy, it doesn't feel like enough, it's something and it counts.
Yeah, I feel like I used to be a stream of consciousness writer too, but I think, and everybody has their own individual process. I still find writing a book very challenging, right? It's so big, it's so long. Something that has started to be more helpful for me is to I'll still engage with just approaching a page, a blank page with nothing but the fact that I want to write. But other times, if I have a specific thing I want to write, or I have a goal or a deadline, I've started to outline more, and breaking it down by story beats can sometimes be helpful. So I might still stream of consciousness a specific story beat, but having a targeted goal has made some of the hard things feel more manageable. And I've also started using the Pomodoro method, and I love Focus Friends and my little bean, who I am now dressing his little room up. So things like that can be really helpful too, just to compartmentalize my time, and also get a little dopamine rush when I get to pick a new wall hanging for my bean.
I'll add a couple of things very quickly. One is just, it's going to take the time it takes to write what you need to write. And that will be different from what it takes anybody else in this room to write what they need to write. It can be very intimidating, especially if you're cued in on social media to be these people are pounding out these words, or people are not I wrote 10,000 words today. I'm I will never fit a 10,000 word day into my life ever. And so also give yourself the freedom to embrace the time you have and accept the time you don't have when you can do that. And write when you can, and when you can't, that's maybe just not the time to write. I think there's a lot of pressure to get a thing done, and I'm sort of circling back to that idea of in publishing, so little is outside your control. The only thing you control is the writing itself. So accept what you can control about that, and as much as you can, let go a little bit of what you can't control. And if that means it takes you 10 years to write a book, it means it takes you 10 years to write a book. That's whatever fits your life is what fits your life, and sometimes you can't force anything that doesn't fit.
This book took 7 years. It just takes the time it takes.
It does. Yeah, and one thing that I like to do is sort of write don't think of it as writing a book. Think of it as sort of like a painting. You're not painting a painting from one corner to the next. You're you're sort of layering in. There's the background. So sometimes if I have a bit of time, I'll use a visual timer and do my 20-minute writing session, and I'll be right now it's just dialogue, and then I'll just have the dialogue. I won't worry about tags or anything like that. I'm sort of finding the time in the margins of life, if that makes sense, and then doing what I can at the time, and then it slowly adds up to a book, and slowly layer it in.
And when it's ready, there's no too long for a book. When it's ready, you will be the right person to deliver that book at that time. If I had published, when I first met my agent, it was 4 years before I actually sold this book. And the book I had at the time, I felt so much pressure. I was this is my opportunity. I'll never get another opportunity. I have to sell this book now or I'll never be contacted again. And I went into a huge depression. I ended up on disability leave. I didn't hand anything in for 4 years. I still work with that agent. It wasn't the right time, it wasn't the right book, and I need to give myself the grace and time to be ready for that. So you can't force something that's gonna like blow up the rest of your life. It has to be sustainable, and most importantly, it has to be enjoyable, because that's at the end of the day why we do this, even though we told you a bunch of really depressing stuff about publishing.
Just add dragons, right?
Yeah, just all.
That is
Dragons with corded forearms.
That is the writing wisdom that we have for you tonight. Anyone else have a question? Yes, hello.
What are your thoughts on romantasy? Would you ever write one? And if not, what draws you to contemporary instead?
That is a great question. Thoughts on romantasy? Thoughts on romantasy?
I mean, I'll read it very happily, but I don't think I'm the strongest at world building, so I probably won't write it because I won't do it justice.
Yeah, I have a lot of fantasy friends, and I'm so impressed with their world building. I'm like, but you build whole worlds, and they're like, but you have to deal with like technology, like, and the cell phone, like one phone call could ruin everything in your pod. Yes, but that's so much easier to like figure out than building a magic system or a whole world. But I'll read them happily.
I'd love to read them.
Do you have one burning in you?
I'm always really impressed by romantasy, because they have to I would say contemporary romance is for the most part they're slimmer books, but romantasy is like you're telling the same romantic arc, but there's so much kind of texture in there, because people are entering with a base understanding, it never better, you probably understand what a destination wedding is. You might not understand what a psych ward is, but you're gonna learn. And there's kind of context clues that we both share, me as the writer, you as the reader. But when you're writing fantasy, and I'm doing a mentorship with a student who's writing a really wonderful book set in a world of bird people. And it's really cool to read. I don't know anything about bird people, but they know so much. And so sometimes when I'm editing the book, I'm like, oh, what's up with this sparrow? And then they have a paragraph long knowledge about sparrows that's not on the page but is in their head. And I think that's the most powerful part of romantasy, is you are a walking encyclopedia of this world, but it also gives you a lot more pathways to spin off to, I think, which is a real power of that. So if you wanted to do a short publication, which I think I always recommend, if you never published anything before, try doing a short publication just to experience, maybe experience rejection, experience putting your name out, experience hitting send. And I do think in fantasy and romantasy, there's a lot more opportunities for spin-off in that sense, so that you can do just a snippet of that world, see how it resonates, and then return and write a version of that entire world, if that makes sense.
The book I got my agent, I should say manuscript I got my agent with, because it never became a book, was this very bananas fantasy with dreams that came real, because this is what I do for a living, is I invent worlds and big wild things, and I deal in symbolism of color, and what are the politics, and what is I love that stuff. And it didn't sell, and most of the feedback was, we don't know what to do with this, but this was a while ago. And now, of course, it probably would have a place if I rewrote it. I think romantasy is super fun. I am thrilled that a sense of fantasy and magic and otherworldliness is pervading a lot of fiction. I think the metaphor of that can take us a lot of really, really interesting places. My feeling about sort of what I do now is that I think the market of romantasy has very narrow expectations right now. You need enemies to lovers, you need a war, you need dragons, one has to be a witch, there has to be a cozy bed and breakfast somewhere. There are things that people are expecting right now that feel very narrow, and I think that will change. I think right now there's just when you get a romantasy, you expect those things. And when that starts to broaden again, I feel like that's when I'm jumping on that, because then I can write something weirdly intellectual where it's not the hot enemy and the armor and I don't need the forearms if I don't want the forearms. I don't need a dragon. I can do something really weird with magic. But I think that's a hard sell right now, because the expectation is very specific of what is selling, and right now publishers are chasing what is selling. So if I'm trying to write something that sells, I'm going to wait till that opens up a little bit. But but I do love that things are shifting in that space.
Hi, my name's Pierce. I actually work in graphic novels. I've illustrated graphic novels thus far, but I've never written them myself. I'm now going into writing as well as illustrating them. So I have a question for you, which is about how do you illustrate perspectives of both the main character and their love interest when both of them are also experiencing growth? How do you manage those perspectives, and how do you manage that growth and showing that through the story?
That's a great question. Also, very cool that you do graphic novels. I love graphic novels. Okay, that's very. So you could do a graphic novel romantasy. maybe that's where you're going. Do we want to talk about dual have you written dual perspectives? I tried. I really, because I was interested in that too. I think the thing about Never Been Better is it's 1250's perspective, and she's an unreliable narrator, partly because she's lying to herself, and partly because sometimes mood swings make you feel like things are bigger or smaller than they are. And so writing this book, I was like, this is very much grounded in what she sees and doesn't see, and that affects the trajectory of the book. When I went to write my second book, and this is not the book that I ended up being my second book, I wanted to write dual perspective because I wanted it to feel very different. And I learned, even though I didn't end up, I did 5 chapters of that book and decided it wasn't it for me. It was really interesting to think about the way that two characters who share a relationship can see that relationship so differently, and what are the highs and lows of that, and what they appreciate the most, and what makes them feel so safe. And so I often now, even though I'm not writing a dual perspective book, I love using dual perspective to get into the headspace of another character, and then go back to the single point of view and translate some of that on the page in a way that I wouldn't have been able to if I didn't kind of try on that voice. So I don't know if that's helpful for you, but writing a dual POV is like the voice is intense.
And it doesn't need to be a dual POV, but I'm also curious how you would handle the secondary character's growth.
Yeah.
If it's from a single point of view as well. So that's just something I'm also curious.
Yeah, so The Summers Between Us is a single POV, but I would like to think that Wes also has his own emotional journey. And so I think for him, like, a lot of it is going to be through like dialogue and action. So, thinking about things that the ways he might have reacted in the past, or having him have certain issues in the past, and then kind of paralleling them with what's happening in the present to kind of show growth. Obviously it's coming from like a colored perspective of like, Leah has her own biases and how she sees Wes and what she interprets as his actions. Trying to find a way to be objective enough while still staying in her lane to show his growth as well was kind of how I approached it. So what would be things that she notices that are different, that maybe the reader then will highlight to think, oh yes, like Wes has made this change since we last saw him as a teenager.
For me, so much of this is what I've done as a costumer. I will get a script with 15 characters, and I have to get in the head of all 15 characters because they would all dress themselves differently. So what is important to them? What do they reveal? What do they hide? What are they comfortable in? How do they feel about gender? How do they feel about their age? How do they feel about their body? Like, I have been asking those questions about characters for the last 30 plus years. And I have sort of cheat sheets that I'll help my students with when they're starting. Like, here are some questions you can ask about each character. They should all answer all of those questions differently. And if they don't, if there's an overlap, their favorite colors are both blue, there's a place you find an intersection. But you have to have conflict in a romance. So one of the things that I really love about building a romance is that you do have a second character who is really important. Who they are has to cause problems for the main character. So you need something that contrasts with that point of view very clearly. So like for the character of Marlowe Banks, who I said she likes to hide everything, I put her with the most public character I could find. For the character in Imogen Finch, who's very homebody focused, everything's about like, I love my town, I love my community, my home, my family. I gave her the guy who travels all over the world and couldn't imagine living at home. So part of how I create those different viewpoints is it's built into the plot. It's like, who is the person who will most challenge my heroine, if I'm telling it from the single point of view of the heroine, so that's already sort of innately built in there. And then with the rest of the characters, I do ask some of those questions. What do they like to eat? How long have they lived in this town? Like I sort of build the backstory in my head, and then figure out how that changes who they are. And sometimes with a tertiary character, you only need to know a couple things about them. They're the town gossip and they're kind of funny. You don't need the rest of the backstory. But for those characters who are really close, I think about personalities that create conflict for each other, but will also build the most rewarding version of that central character when you're done. So that when they get through that challenge, you're like, yes, this is actually, I needed that challenge to become this more confident, stronger, more capable, whatever person. So think about how your plot can actually impact who your characters are.
Great answer. Any questions from this side of the room? Oh, hello.
I'm curious if any of you ever considered self-publishing and going through your journey, and if so, what your thoughts are on that side of the publishing world.
Yeah, that's amazing. So we were just having a talk about this in Calgary because if you know Slow Burn Books, which is the romance bookstore in Calgary, I believe that they're starting a program for indie publishing for romance, which is really cool. So we were just chatting about that the other day. Most of the stuff that I know about self-publishing are from authors who were self-publishing and who came to the publisher. So, and I don't think what they've always told me is that the goal isn't to just to become trad pub and gain a career that way. You don't have to do that. There are so many indie pub writers who are finding immense success. They're reaching so many more readers than is sometimes possible for traditionally published books. So I think that if having more control over the cover, over the marketing, over who's reading it, you get a lot more control in indie publishing, whereas in trad pub, as you've heard us tonight, sometimes they're here's your cover, this is what's up. And so if you enjoy kind of being the face of your book and interacting with readers and doing a lot of that stuff, I think a lot of people feel a lot of empowerment from indie pub because you get to be the person sharing that story with other people. It's not there's layers between how your book is rolled out and the person writing it. But other people, I think, maybe who wouldn't enjoy being the face of their book, maybe traditional publishing is maybe better because they would rather have a team. Or I think it depends on the kind of person you are, but it's all you want to do is find your readers. You want to take the path that best reflects how you see yourself interacting with them, I think.
Yeah, I think the climate for self-publishing is really exciting with what's happening right now. At the time, I just didn't have the personality or any of the skill set that a person would require, and I still don't really have a lot of that kind of business focused marketing skill that it would take. But they're the way people are finding success and just how I find that publishing is pretty risk averse, and indies are just they're the risk takers, and so some of the most exciting writing and stuff that's happening is in the indie space.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of echo what Natalie's saying. I don't think I don't really have the personality to market myself or kind of be the spokesperson for my book. And I think another really great thing about self-publishing or indie publishing is writers who are really fast are able to put out much more books much quicker than traditional publishing does. Fortunately, I'm a very slow writer, and so probably isn't the best lane for me to be in, but I have some friends who are exploring it, and they've had some really great turnout.
I won't do it because I like the team. I thrive on that. That's what drew me to theater and film, and it's part of what I love about once it's sold and I've got a team and they're going to tell me what's working on the page and what's not and what they think. And yes, sometimes I go, really? But I love that thing. It's still, what ends up coming out feels so much better to me for having the input of all these other people and people who are skilled at marketing and people who are skilled at cover design. And again, no matter what my opinions are on any of that, I love having a team to just bounce ideas off and talk that through. So that's why I've never pursued it, but I will absolutely echo what's been said here. Some very exciting things are happening in the indie space right now, and because they're not saying we have to do the romantasy with the quarter four-armed dragon, they're saying it can be anything, and that just boundless sense of possibility, we see that in the indie space. It's just so flooded, you have to be willing to be I'm going to take the risk, and it might find its readers and it might not.
Hi, sorry, thank you. I'm being mindful of time. I just wanted to say thank you so much for sharing your stories and for sharing your voice and your time with all of us. But I'm just really curious, when you finish a book, whether it's your first or if it's your 6th or 7th, is there, and you don't have to share, but is there any kind of like ritual in terms of like, how do you celebrate that? Whether it's with yourself, with your family, your friends? I'm just curious how you celebrate, because that must be such a big win and such a high, I would think.
I was just laughing because my sister's sitting right in front of you.
Oh.
And one time I was FaceTiming her. It was like 2 p.m. on a random day, and she just like FaceTimed me, and I was eating a key lime pie, and she was like, "Am I?" Like I was like, "I just submitted like a draft," and she was like, "Am I watching the celebration?" You kind of are. And like that was my sad celebration because like my family wasn't around. Like everyone was like all my people, and I had submitted it. But yeah, I usually try and like do something a little bit better on the weekend. My key lime pie.
When I finished writing like the first full like edited draft of Never Been Better, it was right after this is how long this book took to come out. It was after the Raptors won the NBA final, and my husband decided to do a post-game interview because we had been watching a lot of basketball, and I was like crying. I was like, "Oh, I did it." He was like, "How does it feel to be an all-star super writer just handed in the book?" And I was just like, "Woo!" I have it on video.
Give it 110%.
I did. I left it all on the field. I think, Candy, we're out of time. But thank you, everyone, so much. Thank you, Perfect Match, for being our wonderful bookseller. We're going to sign books, and we're going to sign books. If you want to come talk to us and ask us more questions, we're not going anywhere. But thank you so much to the VPL for having us, and for all of you for making this night so special. This was so great to be in such a warm room. So please write books if you'd like to write books.